Hello everyone, I'm Akser and welcome to the second R&D webinar at Cooper Parry. For those of you that joined us for our first webinar, it's great to have you back. And for those that have joined us for the first time, welcome to the R&D family. So during our last webinar, we focused on the definition of R&D, how this could apply to the various sectors, and the fact that actually the definition of R&D is a lot wider than initially thought. And we also talked about how it's important to make sure you have the right advice to ensure that you're capturing the maximum benefit that you're entitled to receive. If you haven't already done so, do head over to our new dedicated LinkedIn and Facebook page, where we've already posted a lot of awesome content. And make sure that you follow us, that you keep up to date with all the latest information and insights as we go along. So what are we going to cover today? Well, firstly, I'll be taking you through some of the HMRC statistics and what that essentially means for your sector. Then I'll be handing you over to Jonny, who will be taking you through some of the more recent financial measures and how these potentially impact your claim. And lastly, I'll be handing you over to Luke, who will be going through some HMRC insight and also some of the risk areas. We'll then be holding a Q&A session at the end, so do send in your questions using the question bar on your screens, and we'll do our best to answer all of them today, but any that we don't answer, then obviously we will be sending up some follow-up answers to you next week. So I guess let's get stuck in. This year, we're celebrating the R&D regime's 20th anniversary. And since its inception, we've seen the various regimes going from strength to strength, with significant increases in the benefit that companies can receive. However, more importantly, we've all witnessed the real positive impact this has had on companies as a consequence of the real cash that they've got back to their business. Each year, HMRC publicises its R&D tax credit statistics around sort of September time, and this provides insight on the number of claims, the value of claims, sort of by geography and by sector, as well as ultimately the cost to the exchequer in sort of providing that support. Today, we're going to be looking at some of the different elements within that report. But for those of you that are interested in a little bit more detailed statistics, then please go to the recently published Taxation magazine for an article where we go into a little bit more depth around those statistics and what they mean. So why don't we have a look at how the regimes have evolved over the years? What you should be able to see on your screen is a graph that shows the number of claims that have been submitted across the various regimes and shows a year-on-year rise. What you can see is essentially this is all the claims that have been submitted up to the 30th of June this year, which was sort of the cut-off point for the data. And what we can see is that since its inception, only 300,000 claims have been made across the different regimes. In the 2017-18 financial period, the total number of R&D credits rose to just about 62,000, which was approximately 17% increase versus the prior period. Now, interestingly, out of that 62,000, there was almost 16,000 first-time applicants, and these were largely driven by SME companies. I guess it does still amaze us to this day that there are companies out that are clearly undertaking qualifying activities, but have not made a claim and therefore have lost out on a significant benefit over the years. During the 2018-19 period, so far, there's been approximately 59,000 claims submitted to date, which of around 52,000 is in the SME scheme. So needless to say, the 18-19 figures are expected to increase as more claims are submitted. It works like that because it takes up to 2 years to make a claim, and so therefore there'll be a number of claims submitted since the 30th of June, which will fall into the 18-19 statistics. So it's thought that the sort of the increase in the SME claims in recent years is due to the sort of not only the growing awareness of the regime, but also sort of some of the key changes that have happened since sort of April 2012. Now, these include, for instance, the removal of the £10,000 de minimis, which means that a lot more companies have been able to claim. There was also the removal of the PAYE cap in the same year, which again opened up the scheme to more sort of companies. There was also an increase in the enhanced expenditure rate from 125 to 130,000, 125% to 130%. And also there was an increase in the payable credit rate from 11% to 14.5%. But I guess, how does this translate to the amount of benefit that companies have received? This next graph shows us the support received over the years has increased steadily, as we would expect. And whilst the number of claims under the SME scheme is much higher than, say, under the RDEC scheme, a similar proportion of relief by value has been claimed by both SME and by large companies. And this is no more than purely driven by the fact that the amounts claimed by large companies are generally much larger than those claimed by SMEs. So far, in terms of the 18-19 period, just over 5.3 billion in support has been claimed, of which approximately 3 billion has been claimed through the SME scheme and 2.4 through the RDEC scheme. And based on sort of HMRC's predictions of the timings and in terms of the number of claims that it usually receives after the sort of the cut-off date, it's expected that the final cost of the claims in the 2018-19 period will be around 6.3 billion, which represents an approximately 24% increase versus the prior year. Well, you could be thinking, well, so what? And what does this mean to me? Well, why don't we have a look at the data from a sector point of view, which might be more relevant. So historically, the three sectors that have claimed the most support are in manufacturing, professional, scientific and technical, and information communication sectors. And they continue to be the biggest sectors on a year-on-year basis. In 17-18 period, approximately 6% of the claims were within these three sectors. And in 18-19 period, to date, it's approximately 71% of the total amount claimed. And whilst the absolute numbers will change and increase, it's not expected that the sectors will change in themselves. So using HMRC's data, we're able to calculate the sort of average claim size made within each of these sectors. And I stress this is our calculations as opposed to those published by HMRC, but still nonetheless very useful. Our analysis shows that for companies claiming under the SME regime, the average benefit by claim is approximately between 30,000 and 95,000, and between 77,000 and 1.7 under the RDEC regime, depending on your sector. So the question that you should be asking yourself is, well, is my claim above or below that average for the sector that I'm in? If your claims are below the average for the sector, then I guess you need to think about why this is and therefore what you could do about it. I mean, there could be a number of reasons. It could be that genuinely your business undertakes lower levels of R&D than the industry or your sector average. And whilst this will be true for some businesses, it's often driven by the fact that you're not necessarily capturing all the activities that you're entitled to include within the claim. In our experience, the majority of cases where a company is underclaiming is often when a company is happy with their claims process and are currently preparing it in-house. They may have got a specialist involved at some point to give some advice and develop a methodology, but then for various reasons decided to bring it in-house and subsequently have simply just rolled the process forward. Well, what we often see that happens in that scenario, about 99.99% of the time, and as the business changes and evolves, then teams come and go, or people shift around the business and no longer in the sort of the same departments that have historically been included, or it could be that qualifying activities simply being undertaken in different parts of the business, or it may be that new teams or business areas have been created and are not being captured under the methodology that was developed. Therefore, simply just following your methodology and without sort of considering how your business has evolved or will inevitably lead to your claims reducing. But perhaps the biggest reason for the reduction of claims is that as people come and go, with this, the definition of R&D gets diluted. And if they're not challenged appropriately, then the competent professionals within any company will just default to, this is what we do, it's not R&D. Now, on the flip side, you could be thinking, well, our claims are above the average for the sector, and so therefore I'm okay and I don't need to do anything. Whilst that may be true, you've got to think about, well, what if your competitors are claiming significantly more benefit than you, and therefore using this to fund additional product development, to increase their portfolio of products and capture a bigger portion of the market? Or even they could be using the extra benefit to reduce their prices and retain their margin and ultimately to steal your customers. Equally, if you are rolling forward to a previously developed methodology, you've got to think about, is it still appropriate or could you be overclaiming for certain areas of your business? Needless to say, not all claims can be above average, and equally, not all claims should increase year on year. The important message here is that you don't get complacent in the preparation of your R&D claims, and ensure that your methodology is reviewed on an annual basis. Consider the changes in your business and adjust your methodology so that it's right for the right time. And whilst it will be tempting to prepare your R&D claims in-house to save on advisor costs, this could be costing you your business more as the claims have not been fully captured, all the activities, and therefore you're not receiving the benefit that you're entitled to claim. A good R&D advisor will be able to use their knowledge of the regime and experience in your sector to help assess whether your claim is reasonable versus the average for your sector. More importantly, a good advisor will be able to help you anticipate the potential impact of not only future changes in the scheme, such as the reintroduction of the PAYE cap or the introduction of different cost categories, but they'll be able to advise you how external factors will impact your R&D claim and therefore what you need to do about it. Just as a gentle reminder, I'm sure some of you will have questions. Do keep sending them in and we will answer them, or as many as we can at the end. But for now, I'm going to ask our awesome webinar fairy to work his magic and hand you over to Jonny, who will take you through some of the recent financial measures that have been introduced and how they might impact your claims in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Edgy. So, as Edgy said, I'm Jonny Brewster. So I'm a director, like Edgy, in the Cooper Parry R&D Incentives team. And I am here today to talk to you about the impact that the various COVID interventions are going to have on R&D claims, both now and looking forward. So, to bring up some slides. So, the COVID intervention broadly that we're going to talk about fall into two categories. So, in the first category, we're looking at C-bills, CL bills, and bounce back loans. And in the second category, we're looking at the coronavirus job retention scheme, the job support scheme, and well, effectively furlough. I appreciate there's some commercial differences between those two, but we've separated them into those two camps primarily because the first set are notifiable state aid, whereas the furlough scheme isn't. Now, there's going to be a common theme throughout this presentation of so what? So what? Why is state aid important? Well, if I move on in the slides, we can. What happens is if a project is getting state aid funding through one means or another, it's not entitled to get state aid funding from another means. So if you're getting some state aid funding as a result of a coronavirus intervention, you can't get the SME tax relief benefit because that is in itself a notified state aid. So the coronavirus intervention takes precedence, meaning your R&D claim takes a hit. Again, so what? Well, looking at the SME benefit on the left here, for every £100 of R&D spend that you've got, you can get benefit of up to £33.35 of cash back under the SME scheme. In the large company scheme, which is what happens if you are affected by this and your claim is kicked out of the SME scheme and instead into the R&D expenditure credit or RDEC scheme, well, that benefit is much lower. It's down at around 10%. So there's a significant reduction in your benefit. Well, that's bad enough, right? But actually it goes further than this. Your R&D claim is typically made up of a bunch of qualifying categories from staff costs to consumables, and an important one is subcontracted R&D. Now, for an SME, that's no problem. Subcontracted R&D is an allowable, eligible category for R&D claims. But for a large company claiming under R&D expenditure credit, or a small company that's now been forced to claim under the R&D expenditure credit, subcontracted R&D isn't eligible anymore. So a slice of your claim is gone, and that 10% benefit is actually reduced even further. We're down to some number below 10%, which is huge. So taking a real example, we've got businesses that may have had a £200,000 qualifying project that have then got a £50,000 COVID-related intervention loan, a bounce back loan or a C-bills loan or something along those lines. They could actually be losing out. They could be losing more than the £50,000 worth of cash that they're getting in loan in R&D, and then they're going to have to pay that loan back as well. So you get this kind of almost triple whammy of a smaller rate of relief on a smaller pot of money, and then you have to pay back the intervention as well. We've got an article, as Eddie said, in Taxation that's come out today that touches on this in a bit more detail if you want a bit more reading. Okay, so what do you do if you're in this position? What happens? Well, sadly, the ship has sailed a little bit in terms of the impact. If you have got C-bills in relation to a project or a bounce back loan in relation to a particular project, then you are in that right-hand side category. You are in that lower benefit category. But if you're affected, there may be ways to mitigate some of that reduction to ensure you're capturing everything that you're entitled to. So like Edgy said, there may be any number of reasons why your claim currently is below where it maybe should be, and there could well be scope to increase your claims over and above these. Okay, moving on to furlough then, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, to give it its proper title, or furlough for short. When this was first introduced, it was a relatively simple analysis, right? If you're on furlough, you're not working, and if you're not working, you're not doing R&D, and if you're not doing R&D, you can't get that. That was kind of the initial thoughts that everyone had in the industry. And then HMRC went and confused it slightly by saying they're actually going to allow claims for employees whilst they're on furlough if they are taking annual leave or sick leave, because that's a necessary part of doing business. It's a necessary cost of those employees. So looking at this example then, we've got a employee that for the first 3 months of the year was working as normal, and for the last 6 months of the year was brought back from furlough and was working as normal, but was furloughed for the 3 months in between. Well, it's relatively simple in that initial case then, that you get your SME R&D tax relief for the first 3 months, and you get your SME R&D tax relief for the final 6 months, and that slug in the middle you get nothing for. Well, then when you come to HMRC's latest update, you throw a week or two of annual leave in the middle of that furlough period. Well, what does that do? What does that mean for your claim? Well, it's this so what question again. So, well, actually, so what? It can boost your claim. There is now potential to include staff who have been furloughed within your claim and get some benefit for that. The problem is, unlike the state aid situation, it doesn't render your whole project as RDEC, but because you are essentially receiving funding from the government for that employee during that time, that small part of your claim counts as funded R&D, which then itself is under RDEC at that 10% rate. Anything you top up over and above that, if you're paying more than that 80%, then that element is still eligible for SME relief. So you've got this slightly complicated situation now where you have part of your furlough period will be nil, part of your furlough period will be RDEC, and part of your furlough period might be SME. So what? Well, let's consider the cost benefit again. So if you've got an employee that's furloughed for 3 months that has 1 week of annual leave, assuming they're 50% eligible for their working time, and you don't top up their salary above and beyond furlough or CJRS subsidy, well, actually that works out as about a 30 quid benefit to your claim. So if you're looking at an isolated individual, well, it's probably not worth your while. However, if you're looking at multiple individuals, if you're looking at teams of people, if you've got longer periods of furlough, and with the government's latest announcement only today that the furlough is going to be extended until March, then this is going to go on beyond this. There's going to be this question is going to keep rearing its head. Then we've helped a number of clients with this, and then the modelling that goes into this to see whether it is worth your while. And if you've got questions, obviously we'd be more than happy to take them. I've taken a step back and thinking about furlough more generally. We've noticed a number of clients and businesses around the country have furloughed staff. Quite often there seems to be a prevalence of furloughing the client-facing staff rather than the product development teams or the teams that are doing the R&D work. They seem to stay within the business primarily, and I guess that's relatively easy to see why. Kind of keeping the company moving so that when industry takes off again, then they're going to be in a position to capitalize on it. What does that mean? Well, actually, R&D claims might not drop as much as we first thought they might, but the proportion of staff cost that's being claimed might actually skyrocket, because if you're claiming the same amount of cost but out of a smaller pool because actually this amount was on furlough, so you end up claiming the same amount but out of a smaller pot, your percentage of qualifying staff cost goes up quite significantly. And anecdotally, we've heard through HMRC, those are the kind of metrics they look at when they're deciding on risk levels for HMRC for R&D inquiries. And if those percentages are increasing, then it goes hand in hand that your risk of inquiry may well increase. And to talk a little bit more about HMRC inquiries and what they look like and how best to deal with them, I'm going to ask the magic webinar fairy again to bring my colleague Luke up on the screen and take it from here.
Thanks, Johnny. That's great. So our third and final part of the webinar is covering HMRC inquiries. So if I can just show you my screen. Excellent. So HMRC inquiries, just to give you a bit of a reminder, HMRC inquiries arise because the UK tax regime is self-assessment. What this means is that the burden of calculating how much tax is due, how much should be paid, is placed on the taxpayer. That means that once HMRC come to look at a claim, it is on the taxpayer to explain why they have claimed a certain amount of relief or their tax position is as it is. Now, as you can imagine, HMRC can't look into all businesses' taxpayers. It's just not possible. They don't have the capacity to do that. So to maintain the integrity of the tax system, HMRC open inquiries, which are also known as checks. What I'll cover briefly is what HMRC inquiries look like from a R&D claims perspective, how you can reduce the risk of an inquiry, and what you should do if you actually get an inquiry. So if we move on to what's the headline when we look at HMRC inquiries, the headline is there has been an increase in the number of inquiries into R&D claims. That is fact. We have seen that from speaking to other advisors, we've seen that from speaking to clients, and we've seen that from speaking to HMRC. So the first question may be, well, why? Why are we seeing an increase in the number of inquiries? The first 2 points link back to what Edgy was talking about with the statistics. So first one, number one, we've got an increase in the number of claimants. So if we look back 10 years, there were around 8,000 claimants per year. Fast forward to today, we're looking at 60,000 plus claimants. So clearly, if you've got more claimants, you're going to end up with more inquiries. Linked to this, and probably a more important point from HMRC's perspective, is the increased cost to the Treasury. Again, going back 10 years, we're around £1 billion a year for the R&D regime. Fast forward to today, and we're over £6 billion. Now that for me is an incredible amount, and you can see it's becoming more of a political figure. HMRC are going to want to be comfortable that the regime is meeting its policy goals and encouraging R&D in the right way in the UK. And the only way that they are able to do that is to ensure that people who are making R&D claims, businesses who are preparing claims, are doing it properly. And that's done through looking into R&D claims through inquiries. The third point, and one that's a little bit more difficult to explain in figures, but it is anecdotally happening, is that there has been an increase in the number of advisors. So again, go back 10 years, you would have specialist R&D teams starting up in your big four. You would see them across your mid-tiers, and you would see 1 or 2 boutiques. All it takes now is a quick Google search, and you may get 100, 150 different firms offering R&D specialist services. Now you may say, well, surely increasing number of advisors should increase the quality of the regime, should increase the quality of the claims that are going in, and therefore why do HMRC need to inquire? Well, that's not the full story. The problem lies within the R&D tax legislation and the subsequent guidance. It is in many ways open to interpretation and can be quite subjective. This means that every single firm will have a slightly different interpretation of how to apply those rules. Coupled with this, there is a wide gulf in the type of reporting that companies prepare to support R&D claims. On the one end of the scale, you have those businesses that prepare little to no documentation to support the claim. And then on the other end of the scale, you get those businesses that prepare really complex and detailed documentation. Chances are, if you're on either end of those, HMRC may inquire because they either don't have enough information to assess your tax position, or they have too much information and they find it too complicated. So you may say, well, why should I care? Well, simply put, if you're not claiming R&D tax incentives and you have no intention to, then you don't need to care. It doesn't bother you. But chances are, if you're on this webinar, it's because you're either looking to claim or you have claimed in the past. So why is this important? Well, there's 3 reasons why, if you get an HMRC inquiry, it should be an issue to you. One is they are time consuming. That's time consuming to your finance team, who are having to gather further evidence, maybe redo calculations, find supporting information that HMRC have requested. They are also time consuming for your technical team. Your technical team don't want to be answering questions around projects that were happening 2 years ago. They want to be working on present day issues that are advancing the firm, not supporting an R&D claim that's been and gone. There is also a financial cost. So there is the lost opportunity cost of your finance team and your technical team in answering those queries. There's the cost of potentially paying for an advisor to support you with an inquiry. And then finally, we shouldn't forget that there's also potential penalties that may come if HMRC inquire into your R&D claim and find errors or issues. And the final point, which is a more subtle one and is often missed, is that this can impact your wider tax return. So imagine the scenario: HMRC inquire into your R&D claim, they ask for evidence, they ask questions, and they don't actually like what they find. That then casts doubt on the integrity of your internal processes, your internal systems, your application of the tax legislation. And then they may say, well, actually, we want to look at your capital allowances, want to look at your transfer pricing. actually, have you completed your VAT returns correctly? And this ultimately ends up in more admin burden, which can be avoided. So what can you do to reduce the risk? Well, there are a number of areas you can look at that can reduce the risk of an inquiry. The first one, and you will say, well, yeah, you would say that, is appoint an advisor. Now, joking aside, this is really important. So there are a number of advisors out there, but you need to make sure that your advisor is suitably qualified to help you with the R&D claim. So you would be looking for a company that has accountancy, tax specialists, and also technical specialists in the area that you're claiming. Just looking at what's happened recently, on the 1st of June 2020, the CIOT, so the Chartered Institute of Taxation, released their professional conduct in relation to tax matters around how R&D claims are prepared. And if you look in this document, it talks about what you should expect from an advisor, what a professional advisor operating as a tax specialist should do if they are advising on R&D tax relief claims. So it's well worth, if you're going to appoint an advisor, looking over that document and just getting yourself comfortable that the advisor you choose can actually provide those services that they say they can. Secondly, review your claim process. And this may be done in-house or it may be done alongside an advisor, but look at your claim process. Are you correctly identifying your competent professionals in your business? Are you correctly identifying projects? Do you have timesheets? Do you capture people who are outside the timesheets? How do you capture the costs? How do you identify issues within accounting? So how do you determine whether this is capital or revenue for tax purposes? There are all raft of areas around your R&D claim process that it's well worth looking at and making sure that they are robust. Linked to these is planning ahead. So as you all know, you can go back 2 years from the end of your accounting period to make an R&D claim. Naturally, you would think that sometimes you end up leaving this till the end, and you could be looking back then, if you took, say, a December year end, you could be looking back almost 3 years. A better way of doing this is to plan ahead. So if you are a company with a December year end, look forward to your December 2021 period and actually think, how can we better capture our data? The bit of advice I often give to clients is, if you're looking ahead, once a month, ask your technical person to identify the R&D that's been done in that period and the relevant costs. It may only be an exercise that takes 10 to 15 minutes, but at the end of the year, you have 12 data points upon which to build your R&D claim. That puts you in a much better position so that when you disclose this to HMRC, they are going to be comfortable that your processes are robust. And this brings me on to my final point. And the preparing of documentation is really, really important. If you're going to take one thing away today, it is make sure that your documentation is robust. And by this, I mean your internal documentation, how you track your costs, how you evidence and document your R&D, but also your external documentation, i.e. the report that goes to HMRC. In an ideal world, your report will cover the background to the business. Just let HMRC know what's your business about, what is it that you're doing. A description of the methodology that you've used. This will cover the financial methodology, how you identified the costs, the technical methodology, how you identified qualifying R&D activities, and then finally, a bit around those projects that you're claiming. So this is technical narratives around what projects you're claiming, how they meet the criteria, and making sure that this is in line with HMRC's guidelines. Your documentation, and this is the point you should remember, is what supports your R&D claim. So legally speaking, to make an R&D claim, all you need to do is put your costs in your tax return and say, I am claiming X amount of expenditure of R&D. Look at it from HMRC's point of view. If they receive that and all they've got is £1 million, that is what we're claiming, how can they possibly judge whether your tax return is correct or not? And that's where the documentation to support that is vitally important. So the final point and the final question you may have is, okay, what do I do now? What if I have an inquiry? First off, just don't panic, okay? So there's many reasons why a company may get an inquiry. It may well be because they are in a sector that is high risk to HMRC. So in the past, we've seen IT projects being deemed as high risk. We've seen food and drink sector claims being deemed as high risk. It may be that HMRC are actually looking at a sector and say, is this the type of R&D that we're expecting companies to be claiming? Okay. Secondly, it might be because you've had a change in your financials. So if your R&D claim has gone from, say, 1 million to 2 million, but your turnover has only increased 5%, HMRC may want to understand why. Why has your R&D claim doubled, yet the business doesn't seem to have grown the same? Thirdly, it could well be simply because you've been chosen at random. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong because you get an inquiry. As I said right at the beginning, HMRC have to open inquiries to maintain the integrity of the tax system. So you may just randomly be chosen for inquiry. So you get an inquiry, what do you need to do? First and foremost, understand the queries. Understand what HMRC are asking. What do they want to know? And sometimes it's easy to run away and start preparing a load of data that you think will support what HMRC are asking. But often what we find is companies either prepare not enough information, prepare far too much information, or answer the wrong questions. And this can then lead to extending the length of the inquiry and just more time wasted. Linked to this is engage with HMRC. Speak to the inspector, give them a call, email them, clarify those questions that you might have. The best way to get to the answer quicker and to resolve the inquiry is to speak to the inspector. They may well be able to cover off some of those questions just on a telephone call. Now, they will still require you to document the answers, but at least you know you've progressed the inquiry. And finally, and it's the point I mentioned earlier, appoint an advisor. Appoint someone who can support you with an inquiry, who's got the relevant expertise to say, yes, this is what HMRC are asking for, and this is what you need to do. It may well be that the advisor supports you and says, actually, you have made an error, or actually, you have misinterpreted the guidelines, but at least you can go to HMRC and provide the evidence that you need to. So just as a summary, I'll cover each of the 4 points again. So the R&D inquiries are on the increase, why this is important to you, what you can do to reduce the risk of an HMRC inquiry, and what to do if you get an HMRC inquiry. So that rounds up our webinar for today. Just as an overall summary, I've covered the inquiries, Edgy covered HMRC statistics and what that means to you, and Jonny covered the impact of the COVID packages and how that can impact your current and future R&D claims. So we'll bring everyone back in now. If you have any questions, please do ask away and we'll be answering those for you.
Great stuff. So I can see the first question on the list there is around CBILS. I guess maybe I can address that. So I've got a CBILS loan, and how do I know if I'm affected? Well, I guess it comes back to your application process. So we've seen a lot of clients who applied for CBILS and applied for it and used language to suggest that that money was going to be used to further innovation, to further product development, to further their processes, that potentially almost as a way of boosting their chances of being successful. So the difference is if you've got a project specific COVID loan or COVID intervention loan, then you're going to be caught by this. If you've got a generic loan, bounce back loan, CBILS, CL bills, something along those lines, if that's effectively keeping the wolf from the door, keeping the lights on in the business in these times, then actually you'll probably be okay. But you've really got to kind of get into the detail and see how close, kind of the nexus of how close the R&D project is and the government funding. And if there is an overlap, then you could potentially be in trouble. But we'd be happy to look at whatever.
Steve, can we have the next question?
Yeah, they're coming in thick and fast now, which is great. We've got a question from Steve. He said, what is the typical cost of an advisor to make a claim? Who wants to take that?
Shall I take that one? So a typical cost, that really range, it depends on the type of business it is, the size of the business, the the support that the company actually requires. So you can go from just helping a company in terms of looking at their process or reviewing a current claim right through to preparing the claim from the start. So there isn't a one size fits all, and it does vary from case to case. So it's a great question, but it's not one where we can just say price is X, because one size definitely doesn't fit all for R&D claims.
Excellent, cool beans. We've got, I think this question is absolutely brilliant. It means that you're all going to have to give a quick summary. But from Howard, he wants to know, could you tell us a little bit about Cooper Parry itself and each of your roles within the firm? It would be great to know a bit about your experience.
Okay, why don't I get the ball rolling on that? So yeah, I'm a director in the R&D team, as you said. So I'm actually based in London, look after sort of the London and the southeast region. I'm an engineer by training. I studied material science and engineering before spending some time in industry and actually as a senior scientist at Procter & Gamble before, as I say to most of my clients, crossed over to the dark side and joined consultancy to become an R&D practitioner, which I've now been doing for over 14 years, and still absolutely love it. I love what I do. I love getting in front of different companies and finding about some of the amazing work that they do, and more importantly, getting them the benefit they're entitled to receive, and seeing the sort of the real positive impact that has on their business.
Yeah, and to take up the mantle on that, yeah, there's a lot of overlap between what Edgy's background and mine. So I'm a scientist by background. I've spent a few years working for the MOD straight out of the back of university, doing some cool stuff that I can't really talk too much about. Then decided that the next logical step in my career was to move into tax. So I went the pure tax route and have gone down the chartered tax advisor route. And kind of found R&D as a bit of a niche home for me in terms of being able to bring the science and engineering background together with the tax and numbers, well, geekery for want of a better word. Yeah, and I've been doing R&D now for kind of 12 years effectively, and so within Cooper Parry, I look after R&D across the south of England. So it's kind of from Oxford down to effectively Brighton and then all the way across to Penzance. And Luke?
Excellent. So very similar to Jonny and Edgy. I come from an engineering background. I've worked in R&D tax credits over 14 years now, tax and accountancy qualified, led teams across the north, looking at a wide range of businesses. I feel like I've seen pretty much every business from the two-man startup right through to the multinational, multi-jurisdiction businesses with claims across the UK and Europe. Been involved in a number of HMRC inquiries, which is always interesting and always a challenge because every inspector has their own interpretation as well as the advisors. So it always results in some really interesting discussions. And when you get to the bottom of an inquiry and get that resolution, that is a great feeling because you've helped the client out, you've helped them get the answer that they need, and hopefully what it does is it improves their process as well going forward. So okay, do we have any more questions, Steve?
Yeah, we got loads more questions, but one thing I just wanted to pick up on what we were just saying there. I think that I mean I know the answer to this, but I think a lot of people don't know that most of our advisors have worked in other industries first, haven't they? So they understand the industry first, and then they understand the tax, and that's why you have that relationship with people. And I get that. But anyway, I'm stepping out of my lane again. But we have got some more great questions. One quick fire question would be: can charities claim?
Shall I take that one?
Go for it.
So the legislation changed so that charities can't claim, and there was those who worked in the university sector will have realised that a number of years ago universities were actually claiming the R&D expenditure credit, but HMRC realised that wasn't the intention, so they have changed it so charities can't change because they don't actually fall within the tax regime that allows them to do that. However, what is worth noting is that if charities, as they are, have a trading subsidiary and that trading subsidiary is undertaking R&D activity, that trading subsidiary can claim. So it's just worth pointing out that if you do have a charity situation, it's worth looking at the entire structure rather than just considering it's a charity and writing it off.
Excellent. And we have a question from Mike. How long does the process take on average? E.g., after submission of a claim, how long until the value is accepted by HMRC? And then how long does it take for payment to be received?
Should I take that one? Right, okay. It's a great question. You know, with cash flow being at the front of companies' minds, it's always, you know, it's one thing doing your claim, it's the next thing actually getting the cash back, because ultimately why are you doing it? You're doing it for the cash, you're not doing it for anything else. So how long does it take a claim? Well, we've turned claims around in 4 weeks. That's entirely possible, particularly if you've got good financial records, you've got good accessibility to the technical team, you understand your projects and you understand your criteria. So the preparation of a claim can be done within 4 weeks. In terms of how long it takes HMRC to pay the cash back, they do try to pay it within 28 days, but that sometimes doesn't happen. Obviously, at the moment, there are a number of issues with coronavirus and everything else that the government's trying to support. So getting that cash back into the business is taking a bit longer. We can speak to HMRC and try to speed that up, but ultimately you are at the will of HMRC to process your claim and make that payment. And they do send to advisors monthly updates on what the current processing time is. So it is one where you'd like to get it back in that time, and it'd be nice to, but don't necessarily rely on it for cash flow purposes, but we can give you a steer on what that would look like.
Cool, great answer. We've got a question here from Christopher. Are there any specific sectors that can't claim? Are there any sectors that HMRC specifically think are underclaiming?
I can take that one. The regime is open to all sectors, and I think it's safe to say between the three of us on this screen, we've pretty much seen claims in every single sector that is out there. So unless you're running just a warehouse, it's likely that there'll be a level of R&D within your business. In terms of any sectors that are underclaiming, there's one very specific one that in my mind, which is the construction sector. It's still a sector that HMRC believe is underclaiming significantly, and it's one of the only sectors that have, as some people call, received a love letter from HMRC encouraging them to claim more within that industry, and they really should be making more of it in terms of what's available to them.
Yeah. And I guess just to add to that, sorry, looking at the table that you put up, Edgy, the kind of the average claim values per sector, look, actually when you're looking at SMEs, the benefit is broadly consistent. Yeah, it goes from kind of 35,000 to 75,000, but still that's, you know, we're not talking orders of magnitude average size difference between kind of the smallest and the largest. So actually, regardless of sector you're in, there is likely to be an R&D claim, and it is almost certainly worth your while to dig into it and try and unearth it.
Excellent. I mean, the questions are coming in thick and fast now. John says that he has a CBILS loan or CBILS loan. How does he know if he's affected?
Oh, so I guess that comes back to the point I was making in terms of the documentation that you need to apply all those application forms. If you're applying for it for a project specific purpose, then, and that is an R&D project, then that's going to be impacted. But if it's a generic business purpose loan that might well have some R&D input, but it wasn't the reason you applied for it, or wasn't the reason you got it, then you should be fine. But yeah, again, we're quite happy to review that documentation and give you a view on what may or may not be possible.
Fantastic. Now we've got a question from Lee. He says he's been approached by a company who have said they will put together their claim on their behalf and then take a percentage if successful. Is this allowed or even legal?
Yeah, so I can take this one. It is depending on the relationship that that company has with the R&D advisor that they're trying to do a claim with. We are allowed to give contingent fees, so success fees, as we like to call them, so long as we meet the various auditor independence rules that are out there. So it's not unusual for the industry to work in that way.
Okay. Gosh, I can't believe how many are coming in now. This is fantastic. So from Chris, is there any guidance from HMRC as to what to expect from an R&D advisor, or how to find a decent one?
Yeah, I can take that. So there is guidance. I think I mentioned it earlier in the presentation from the CIOT, from the Chartered Institute of Taxation, and that looks at what sort of skills the R&D advisor should have. So their understanding of the criteria, the understanding of the tax legislation, the understanding of the CURD guidelines, and so on, which is the guidance produced by HMRC. And what you've got to consider is, if you're asking an advisor whether they are able to prepare your R&D claim, if you say to them, can you prepare me a claim, they're likely to say yes. But then if you challenge a bit further, if you want to do your diligence, you may say, well, I've got this documentation in front of me. Can you do these things? Do you have evidence of it? What's your experience? And so on and so forth. And that should help you then find an advisor that is fit for purpose for you. And I think, Steve, we probably should be able to share a link to the guidance after the webinar in any case, in the follow-up notes.
So I'm going to do a shameless plug here now for our team. So Chris Knott, who heads up our team at Cooper Parry, he's actually one of the only 5 people that has invited to be part of a task force that created those guidelines. So if upon reading the document at all, if you have any questions, then obviously please do get in touch, and we'd be more than happy to help you with some of that advice. Plug over.
Yeah, it's not shameless. We like that. We have a great question from Jacob. Will Brexit affect the jurisdiction of the European patents and therefore the patent box scheme? I suspect the answer to this may, I don't know, go, I need to take that offline, but I don't know. What do we think?
Yeah, I guess I can take first run at that. But in terms of, so will it affect the jurisdiction? Then, yeah. So in terms of the impact of things on patent box, absolutely, it's probably something we'll pick up offline. But I guess what we've seen is, the application of R&D to these kinds of things is the UK application of the EU rules about what makes a business an SME or a large business. Actually, it was European directives that were then implemented by UK legislation. And as it currently stands, we've not heard any rumours about the UK kind of appealing or overturning those specific applications. So from an R&D perspective, everything should, at least initially, stay broadly consistent. But we can definitely follow up on the patent box point.
I think what's quite cool as well is to let everybody know that all of these questions will have written answers with them sent out to everybody next week. So any questions that have been asked today, we'll be making sure that we're answering them correctly and be able to give you more answers. Question from Holly. Could having a charitable aspect within the business, not separate, does this impact our R&D claim?
That is a good question. It would come down to the facts. We would have to get more information on that to answer it fully. If there is a trading aspect to the claim and to the business, and that's the important point, right? R&D claims are in relation to a business's trade, so it needs to have trading income. It needs to be separate from the charitable aspect, but we would need to look at that in a bit more detail to be able to give a full answer.
Excellent. Now we do have a few more minutes left, and we've got 3 questions. So this one is from Donna. What records should be maintained to make sure that we get our claim correct when it comes to furloughed employees?
Well, I guess that one's for me. So in terms of what you'll need to bear in mind for when it comes to working out what you need to claim, essentially you're going to need a list of everybody who was furloughed, for how long they were furloughed, whether they were full-time furloughed, part-time furloughed, whether you're topping up, not topping up, whether they're on annual leave or sick leave, kind of what records you've got in place to track all these. And given the fact you can make R&D claims up to 2 years from the end of the accounting period, like it might well be that your first claim encompassing these are December 2020, when the deadline for that might be December 2022. Well, actually, it's much easier to put that information in place now, even in a spreadsheet, in a Word document somewhere on your computer now, rather than try and revisit it 2 years down the line when it may well be you've had some staff turnover, you may well be in a position that you can't answer those questions and you might miss out on some relief. But yeah, kind of more information is definitely useful in terms of keeping track of furloughed employees.
Really good. Okay, so we might be able to get both these questions in. Hopefully we can. Does our R&D claim have to be prepared and submitted by our accountant, i.e. should everything be done together?
I don't mind taking that one. The simple answer is no. So an R&D advisor could prepare your R&D claim, your accountant could prepare your account, so you could have a separate tax advisor who does your tax return for you. The important point, and this is the real important one where there can be a disconnect, is that the R&D claim must be made in the tax return. Therefore, there has to be some sort of interaction between your R&D advisor, whoever that may be, and the person who prepares your tax return for you. The R&D advisor, in most cases, can't do that in isolation. So that's just one to watch out for, particularly if you're running close to a deadline, and I've seen it happen in the past where an R&D claim has been completed, yet the company has been unable to get their tax advisor to prepare the tax return and they miss out. So that's one way you do need to be a little bit careful. But in terms of who does the work, no, absolutely, that can be separate.
Fantastic. We've got one question left, and I know we've got 1 minute left, so I feel bad if we left and didn't answer it. So can a different advisor help with a HMRC inquiry to the one that helped prepare the claim in the first place if confidence has been lost in them?
Definitely, yes. And we see that a lot. So it could well be that an advisor has prepared a claim and part of their engagement is not to assist with inquiries, and they've decided that they don't want to get into the inquiry. Or it may well be that actually they've made an error, or they just don't want to carry on working with the client, and we see that quite a bit. So yeah, we can, and we've been doing that ourselves, helping companies out who've had R&D claims prepared by other businesses or other firms.
Yeah, absolutely. And we offer the kind of the inquiry resolution service that we do is, like Luke said, it's one of the kind of specialist skills we've got as an R&D team with a number of nearly 20 people nationwide now talking about R&D. We've seen a lot of inquiries and we've resolved every single one that we've seen so far. So it's one of the skill sets, and we've taken on other people's inquiries as well. So we're absolutely happy to take on any more.
Really good. Well, we are out. No more questions, guys.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Well,
thank you
very
everyone.
much.
And yeah, as Steve mentioned, we'll be sending out answers and sort of follow-up points from the webinar today. Hope you all enjoyed it, and see you for the next one.